Hey everyone, Chris Duham here with Spark Offices, and today we're doing our Snacks with an Expert with Kelli Rafferty and Linda Cornfield. And basically, what we've tried to do with Snacks with an Expert is just give members and outside community an opportunity to maybe ask questions that they may not normally be able to ask, get really good advice from people that they may not have communication with on a regular basis, and just making information available for people. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kelli, and she's going to sort of get us right into our Snacks with an Expert. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So we, interestingly enough, we had done a presentation similar to this with the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce, literally as COVID was on our doorstep. I think it was one of potentially the last things we did in the community, or close to it. And the reason that we want to present this information, what we call, difficult conversations that you don't want to have, but you really need to. For me, the genesis of wanting to talk with our community about this type of thing came from a personal experience with my aunt. So my aunt was 62 years old, and she was in end-stage cancer. And for her, the end came much sooner than we thought it would. So 4 years ago in January, we were told she probably had about a year to live with her cancer. They had really exhausted everything. But within 2 months, she was admitted to the hospital, and they were told it was actually a matter of weeks. So we were left completely reeling from the news of that. But also I knew I was going to be the executor of her estate. I was not prepared for what that would be. But moreover, I needed to have really hard conversations with her about what are we going to do with a DNR? What's your overall healthcare proxy? How long are we going to let this go? She was at a point where she still wasn't ready to let go of that, but we signed the DNR because we didn't know what was ahead for us. She ended up taking some measures, which I supported for her, and she lived until June. And then, finally she was admitted to the hospital for the last time. But within that, we were able to bring her home in March. And she said to me on the drive home, we have to stop at the bank, and I need to put your name on the bank account. And we went to 3 different banks, and we called her attorney and made sure that the trust documents were in place. And she put my name on the house over the course of, about a week and a half or so. And we were able to sort of quickly ramp up the business end of what would be ultimately closing out her life with us. And even though all of us are, we like to think relatively young, if there's one thing that I think we've learned over the course of the last year and a half is life. And I think we're always aware of it, but I think with COVID, I think all of us are very well aware how dramatically our life can change from a health perspective when you least expect it. I'm also going to bring up somewhat of a heavy topic. I was driving to the Cape June 21st and came upon, I actually saw the whole thing unfold, came upon a fatal car accident on Route 3 in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And, was there trying to rescue the woman, and she was already deceased on scene. And I think about her a lot. I think about her personal effects washing out of the car because she landed upside down in a river. and her personal effects are floating down the river. And I don't know if her family was prepared for what happened to her. So while this is a really heavy topic, it's important that you have conversations with your loved ones about what they want for their, their funeral arrangements. Where is the paperwork? This isn't a conversation about you want to know what you're getting in the estate. That's not what it is, but you need to be prepared to know where things are. I knew where things were, and I was still unprepared, and it took 2 years to close my aunt's estate. But I knew what charities she wanted to donate to. I knew what she wanted to have happen with key mementos in her house and where those were going to go. And those were the worst conversations I've ever had. But it's important to really think strategically with your loved ones before a crisis hits. Because if you end up yourself, if your loved one ends up in our emergency department at the Elliot, you really need to think about what do you want to have and what do you want your family to be able to do for you. And I think I sort of dove into this. So I work for Elliot Health System, and we've certainly learned, and I learned this with the donors that I work with. I lead our philanthropy program, that they're already thinking about leaving the Elliot in their estate plans. And, but more importantly, there are some real tactical things that we want people in our community to know about relative to, being protected yourself as a patient so that your family knows what your wishes are, and really understanding all of that. I am very lucky to have an incredible colleague in Dr. Linda Kornfeld. This is a lot of the work that she is a real expert in. I don't know how she does it every day, especially over the course of the last year and a half. Our community has been tested in ways from a clinical perspective that none of us could ever have imagined. One of the follow-up pieces that I'll ask Chris and Jenna to send out is a link to an incredible story of one of our COVID patients. He was our first community COVID patient at the Elliot. His name is Mark. His story is unbelievable. And he was the first patient when none of us knew what was coming at us, really. And how our staff communicated through the iPad to his wife, and she was intimately involved in his care, even though she couldn't physically be there. But she knew what the plan was going to be. And I've learned a lot from Mark and his family and their experience with COVID. And I'll send you that link because his story is inspiring. But I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Kornfeld, to really talk with you strategically about how do you look at your care plan and your advance directive, because you don't want to do this in a crisis. We want you as a patient yourself, but more importantly for the care you might be supporting your loved one in, what to do in a crisis. So again, thank you for being with us. We've got a few people in the room with us here, Dr. Kornfeld. I know this is a sad and heavy topic, but it's really important. So Dr. Kornfeld.
Thank you very much. So my name is Linda Kornfeld, and I am a palliative care physician at the Elliot Hospital. And I spent several years working at Elliot as a general internal medicine doctor before specializing in palliative care. And most people aren't familiar with palliative care, so I'll start off with just a little intro as to what that is. And we are a medical subspecialty, just like cardiology or kidney docs or cancer docs, that take care of patients with serious illness. And often that means caring for patients at end of life, but it doesn't have to. So it's a bit broader than that, of really helping patients through the struggles of dealing with a new diagnosis, a chronic illness, the physical or psychological complaints that come with that, nausea, et cetera, and also helping the families to understand what's happening, what the options are, and kind of work through this process. I appreciate the invitation to come and speak with you today because it is a difficult topic. And it's one that is easy to sort of push away rather than embrace. So I want to commend you for being open to talking about these things today, and want you to know that we are very aware of the challenges that can come with this, and are happy to be available down the road if we can help you through any aspects. I asked Kelli to start off with her story because I've heard it before, and I know it's a powerful one, and she and I have spoken about it because of the impact that it's had on her. And the thing that I have found over the years in working in this field and talking about this sort of arena is that once you put this topic out on the table, pretty much everybody has some story to go with this, some tale of a family member or a friend or spouse that went through a difficult period, and either look back on it in a positive way of, although this was a difficult time, it allowed us some closeness, some familial connections, and have positive connotations with it, or look back on it as really a difficult, stressful, anxiety-ridden, frustrating time. And I think that's some of what this motivation comes from, is to try to steer towards the first. That although it's a difficult time and period, there are things that we can do to make it better. And although it's our instinct to kind of bury it and shove it and push it away, rather than do that, I want to try to show you that it doesn't have to be momentous, burdensome, difficult. And there are ways to go through this that are more positive and that really are not overly logistically challenging. So, we all have a tendency to push things aside, and there's nothing more easy to put off than things that are legalistic, bureaucratic, paperwork, and dealing with a tough topic. So there's a lot of different kind of tools that we can bring into play here. Kelli's story, and I apologize, Kelli, I didn't know about the car accident that you witnessed recently, and that is a very traumatic experience for you to have gone through, much less for the family. And I can hear that the impact that had on you and how it is staying with you. And I would bet you're right that they did not have any expectation of things coming. And it does speak to our frailty and our world around us. So the first thing that I want to do is I was kind of jotting down a couple notes as Kelli was talking. And we as medical providers often use a lot of terminology that is foreign and can be intimidating. And when we get into this arena, we're very good with abbreviations and nomenclature that are not always familiar to people. And just in the course of your quick story, I wrote down DNR, healthcare proxy, executor, and hospice. And those are all terms that carry a lot of weight with them and a lot of uncertainty to them. So the thing that we most want to talk about today is what we call advanced care planning or advanced directives. And what that really is the process of kind of self-reflection, thinking about who you are, what's important to you, documenting these things, talking to other family members or friends about these things, and setting up the legal paperwork that allows someone else to make decisions on your behalf. So as long as you are awake, alert, cogent, able to interact in a meaningful way, then there's no need for someone to make decisions on your behalf. But if something happens where you are not able to speak with yourself, then that's when we would go to someone else. And if you have completed your paperwork, then you will have declared who you want that person to be, who your representative should be, and who you would want to speak on your behalf. And that's what Kelli was saying that she was for her aunt. So in New Hampshire, it's called the Durable Power of Attorney for Healthcare, or DPOA. Those are the phrases that you'll hear. In other states, it's the healthcare proxy. So particularly in Massachusetts, you'll hear healthcare proxy, and it's kind of a smattering across the country. But that is the legal representative. If that's not in place, we will step into what is called surrogacy. So New Hampshire and most states have legal definitions as to who would be the next person in line. And the reason I encourage people to pick somebody rather than leave it to sort of chance is two things. The first is it allows you to pick who you want rather than who the New Hampshire Senate might have thought was appropriate. And the second is that it allows you to talk to them. I think it's apparent from listening to Kelli that her aunt's death was difficult. It was emotionally difficult. It was logistically difficult. And yet there was some reassurance that things had already been put in place, that at least she knew some of what was needed, some of what was expected, and how much harder that would be if that weren't there. So setting up the DPOA allows us to know with certainty, this is who this person wants to speak for them, and that they have had some connection, some discussion, some planning as to who that person would want and what they would want. And this becomes important for two things. So the one is you want someone to represent you and your personal wishes. The second is that by preparing that person, you're giving them a gift. And that is that gift of peace of mind, of knowing that they are honoring you, respecting you, and fulfilling your wishes, rather than that nagging doubt of, am I doing the right thing? Is this what we should be happening, etc. And this is something we see a lot in the hospital, is you can imagine that families are brought into difficult situations and are full of doubt of, is this what my father, my brother, my son would want, etc. Versus knowing, this is a tough situation, but I at least am confident. And that is a really strong sensation. So the form that we are talking about, and I'm going to just hold them up to the camera because I think that this is the best way to do it. This is my first time doing this by Zoom, so I apologize if there's sort of technical glitches or it's not the most efficient route. But this is a advanced care booklet that is put out by the state of New Hampshire. And it's pretty intense. There's a lot of wording in it, and it's a little daunting because it really is a booklet filled with page after page of terminology and questions and forms and things like that. It comes down to the nuts and bolts are really just a couple pages. And it's this form here that asks really just 4 questions on it. And these are questions about who do you want as your designated DPOA, as well as an opportunity to put an alternate in there. We always encourage you to put an alternate if there's any possibility, and that can be for a variety of reasons. You can imagine that a lot of times people put their spouse, and it's not uncommon that as you age, your spouse is also aging and may develop dementia or other illnesses that really put them in a place that is not a great spot for them to continue to function. And so having an alternate is really important. You don't have to be in physically in person. Like I actually am the DPOA for a family friend out in Denver. And I can be reached by phone and such. And so the logistics of being nearby aren't as important as the connection and knowing that person. The form then goes on to ask a couple of questions about what's important to you and regarding medical conditions and permissions for what your DPOA is allowed or not allowed to do. And then there's a big blank space that is for you to personalize this. And I'll tell you, the majority of people don't write anything. And I think it comes back to being a little intimidated by this form and by the whole topic. And it feels very legalese and that you have to write things out in a very proper, serious manner. And I would encourage people to reflect on it in a way that put what's important to you. And it can be something as simple as this is music that I enjoy listening to. Or I've seen some that are really quite lovely that say, I want my husband to know that he has been a great caregiver for me over the years. Make sure that he understands that. Or reassurance to your family that you are doing the right thing by caring for me in this way. As well as things like, I want to be an organ donor. It can be very simple and concrete, but it's a place to sort of add some more personal insight into what's important to you in this situation. The other things that I wanted to show you, and these are all handouts that we have that we use in our practice that we are able and would love to provide to you if you want them. So obviously I can't hand them out to you over Zoom, but I spoke with Kelli and we would be happy to provide them for you kind of down the road. So this is something called the Conversation Project. And it's a program that came about maybe 10 years ago when a woman was dealing with her mother's Alzheimer's. The woman who founded this project is a reporter, and she was really struggling with not knowing what her mom would want, not knowing what the options were for her mother through this process. And she kind of said, you know, good Lord, I am a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter and I'm having trouble having this conversation. I should be, of all people, able to have a detailed, difficult conversation with a person, and I can't. So looking to have resources to help facilitate these conversations is the goal of this project. And they have a mantra, which I really like, which is around the kitchen table, not in the ICU. And the idea there is that it's so much easier to have a difficult conversation when things are calm and in a familiar environment and with the people that you care about around you, rather than in a panicked situation when it's a crisis moment and there's an urgent need for a decision. That doesn't lead to the best reflection and introspection and certainty with these things. So I like this brochure because it's pretty short, it's about 10 pages and they're small, and it has a format that I think is much friendlier than the other brochures and really encourages people to sort of have some self-reflection and gives you some ideas of how to have icebreakers with your family and phrases that you can use to sort of start this conversation. And they can be very helpful if you're sort of reticent. How do I bring this up with my daughter? What's she going to think? What does this mean? What are the implications to this? And it's saying things like, I need to think about the future. Will you help me? It's a pretty benign statement, and yet it opens doors and allows that conversation to happen. And I just answered some questions. These are my answers. I want you to see them, and I'm curious what yours would be. Again, a way to reflect and think about what's important to you and how to talk with someone else. They have other brochures that are specific about how to choose a healthcare proxy. Again, the default is often spouse or children, but it certainly doesn't have to be. And as Kelli said, that, you know, having a family member that's a little bit more distant sometimes is really a wise choice because it takes away some of that emotionality of someone who is the closest person. I don't mean to say that you weren't close to your aunt, but there's a little distance can sometimes be a helpful technique to this, as well as that age difference that you presumably are younger than your aunt and therefore more likely to still be in a good position as she gets older with this. There is one that is specific for dealing with patients who have Alzheimer's, that you can imagine that is a very different kind of scenario and challenges with this in understanding what to expect from this illness and what they may encounter in going through this. And the last one is because we are all intimidating at times, how to talk to your doctor and phrases of how to bring this up in conversation. There's an organization down in Massachusetts that did a study a few years ago, kind of asking people, both medical practitioners and patients or just people in the community, do you think this topic is important? And I'm going to summarize the data because I don't have it here, but in a nutshell, pretty much everybody said, yeah, this is important. These are things we should talk about. But then it came down to the nuts and bolts of who should talk about it, when you should talk about it, when it should be introduced, who should break, and everyone kind of backpedaled, right? people said, oh, my doctor should do it. I don't want to do that. I couldn't introduce that topic. That's horrible. That's a hard thing to talk about. And doctors all said, oh, I don't want my patients to think that I'm giving up on them, or that I'm worried about something, or that I don't have faith in that. I don't want them to lose faith in me. I don't want to be the bad guy. As well as, these conversations take time. This isn't a 5-minute kind of, hey, how's it going? Let's change your blood pressure medicine discussion. And how do we incorporate that into an already sort of frenzied pattern of life? So this brochure about how to talk to your doctor is helpful to say, hey, listen, I value this and I want us to have this conversation, and kind of giving your doctor permission to have this conversation with you and help you through this, and potentially help bring your family members into this conversation and say, this isn't because I think something is going to happen tomorrow, or I'm worried, or that something bad has happened that I haven't told you, but this is a routine thing that I want everybody to be as aware of as they are for vaccines or mammograms. That really is the goal, is to have this be a default part of our medical care, rather than something that happens only when we're worried about something. I do want to say, and I apologize, I didn't say this at the beginning, if anyone has questions or there's things that come up, I did notice Kelly's also sort of jotting some things. So if I'm saying things that need some edification, or other things come up, please just grab my attention. There is a book that came out a few years ago called Being Mortal by Dr. Atul Gawande. And he is a surgeon down in Boston at an academic medical center down there. So you would think that he, of all people, would be well-versed in this, both for his patients and for himself. And the book talks about how his parents, his father, was diagnosed with cancer, and how difficult it was for him to navigate the system. Both his parents are doctors, his father was a urologist, and even with that, they struggled. So he, being the introspective and thoughtful person that he was, kind of led to reassess his own practice with things, and developed this thing called 5 wishes. And it's another approach to kind of asking these same questions of, fundamentally, what is important to me? And what do I want to have carried over to me when challenges arise? And these can be either difficult diagnoses, end of life, or other decisions with this that fundamentally bring your values into care. And this one is kind of nice because it has some suggestions in it of things that people have said are important to them. And it asks you to look through them and just cross them out if you don't agree. So you don't have to put things in your own words, but it kind of helps steer some of these. And it does allow you to sign it and reflect on it, but it's not a legal document. It's more of just a reflection of your wishes. The DPOA document is a legal document that gives that person the legal right to make decisions on your behalf. And as such, and I apologize, I didn't show you the end, it has to either be notarized or witnessed. So if there's a notary, then they will notarize it and it's done, it's legal. If you're witnessing it, just have 2 witnesses in place, and that is adequate. I personally recommend that you go through this with someone who is familiar with the form, rather than just filling it out, because sometimes the wording is difficult to interpret if you haven't looked at it before. And having someone to kind of explain it can be helpful, rather than just filling it out and having it witnessed. And this is where presenting it to someone in the medical field or in the legal field can be helpful to interpreting it. If you do end up going to an attorney, they often will make their own forms that are very similar to these in the questions that are asked and the exploration of what your wishes would be and what legal rights you want to give to your power of attorney. They're often a little longer, but they give the same idea with everything and are fully equivalent as far as the legal rights that are presented to your power of attorney. So you do not have to go to a lawyer in order to have this put in place. The things we're talking about that I am familiar with have nothing to do with finances. I cannot offer any advice on what it's like to be an executor of a state or any of those things. I have certainly seen and heard many stories similar to what Kelli was saying, which even when you kind of thought you were prepared for it, it's remarkable how difficult it is to function in that role and to bring everything together. And I certainly would advocate for the same kind of think ahead approach for it and be as thoughtful and thorough as you can with it. But I can't speak to that myself. But I would certainly encourage you to contemplate these things. Some of the other information we have, this is one that is put out by the Catholic Archdiocese that is specifically about the Catholic approach to end of life, that there often is a lot of uncertainty as to what is accepted within the Catholic faith in particular. And I think it's very nicely written. It's specifically by the New Hampshire Catholic Diocese and really goes through the philosophy and spiritual aspect of end of life care, and is really very supportive of palliative care and hospice for end of life care, in that there is a recognition that there's no benefit to suffering at end of life. And that as long as you are not aiming to actively shorten a person's life, that you are well within the Catholic purview. So this can be very reassuring to people who are uncertain as to what would or would not be within their faith system. The last book that I was going to show you is one of my favorites, and it's titled, Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant? And it's by the New Yorker cartoonist Roz Chast, and it is a graphic novel, and it is all about her dealing with her parents' diagnosis of dementia. From the beginning, when there's uncertainty, she's just kind of has some hints that things might not be quite right. Maybe they're forgetting little things here and there. Their groceries aren't quite right. Their finances are a little funny, to it being much more advanced and really having to look at nursing homes and dealing through end of life with this. And it's a little easier to read because its format is just a little more inviting, and yet really talks through a lot of very difficult and complex situations and treats them very seriously. So that is a recommendation for you also. So I'm going to pause. I've been babbling for almost a half an hour. Any thoughts or questions at this point?
I do have one.
Yes, Jenna has one.
You can relay it because I'm sure Dr. Cornfeld can't hear me, but is there a difference between having witnesses versus a notary on the paperwork? If the witnesses were perhaps, maybe, I'm thinking of an example, my father and his two daughters were to sign it, if my mother was to come and contest, would that be less binding than if it was notarized?
No. So the question is there any difference between having your advance directive notarized versus having two witnesses? And my understanding is that this was a deliberate attempt on the part of the legislature to make this as accessible as possible to people, that we want you to be able to do it at home at your kitchen table, that it shouldn't cost you additional time or money to go find a notary to have to do this. Now, obviously, your witness can't be the person that you're nominating, right? It has to be two people who aren't being elected within that. But otherwise, if it's witnessed appropriately, it's just as legally binding as having someone notarize it. The only reason that I might encourage a notary is if, for instance, we have notaries in the hospital, and so they do these a lot, and they're very familiar with this document and can kind of talk people through if there's uncertainty as to how to interpret it. So not necessarily steering people or offering advice, but simply making sure that their interpretation of it is indeed how we interpret it in the medical field.
Absolutely.
So, good question.
Great question. Yeah. Other questions?
Thoughts, comments, stories?
Yeah, lots of notes have been jotted down here with our group here. You know, I think, Dr. Kornfeld, I think one of the things that that you pointed out that's really important for people to think about is, while this is, you know, a really challenging circumstance, you know, if you are in the position with a loved one or a friend where you need to help them to make key decisions, what I will say is, as tough as it is, just having gone through it, to help somebody in that time of their life, to, I think, again, to give them peace of mind, that their wishes are going to be honored, that someone will speak for them when it comes to a point where they're not able to. That's, I think, really important. And even though, you know, in our personal circumstance, my aunt had cancer for 7 years, and when the end was coming, she still wasn't prepared for it. But I do think that, you know, knowing that, you know, the business end of, you know, her life, but more importantly, how her care would be at the end of her life, and knowing the decisions that she wanted us to make on her behalf, I think it gave her that level of peace. But I think moreover, and again, we see, Dr. Kornfeld, you see this all the time. Our colleagues in the emergency department see this all the time. If you have to make a decision in a moment of crisis, I think that amplifies the anxiety. And to your point, am I making the right decision? Is this really what they would want? And sometimes you have to make those decisions really quickly, unfortunately. So I think those were really important points you brought up.
I will tell you an example that literally today I met a patient's family. She had a brain bleed, so a stroke, a hemorrhagic stroke, and is not able to be part of the conversation. She's nonverbal right now. And her two family members were talking about what things might look like down the road for her and what the possible options were. And we were talking about some difficult things about potential end of life versus nursing home with significant abilities as possibilities, et cetera. And you could see on their faces that this is a difficult thing for them to contemplate, for them to this. And I said to them, you know, your role here is to be her voice. And you are not making decisions for her. You are telling me what she would want if she were here. And as soon as they heard that, you could see this calmness on their face. And they both were like, oh, absolutely, this is what she would want. 100%, no doubt. And that brought them a real confidence that what they were doing was, quote, right, but honoring and respecting her. And that they would never doubt that they had made a decision on her behalf that was what she would want. And I'll tell you, that gift of certainty and peace that comes with it, you cannot overestimate how nice it is to see that in someone you love, rather than that distress and fear and worry of, am I doing the right thing for this person?
Thank you. So any other questions or thoughts that any of you here have?
I think it's definitely, and I can speak to both the power of attorney, financial, and the health side of things. Both documents you can actually just do a Google search, you can download online, and they're legitimate forms. I definitely think that the financial power of attorney does hold equal weight and importance as the healthcare one, because I run into families daily for years that it's like, oh my God, I have no idea what was going on, and now that mom or dad can't do it, they have to go do a super painful court process and legal battles and surrogacy, all of that stuff. So the financial is definitely a little bit more wordier. It's a little more complicated. You definitely need a notary, but it's definitely worth sitting down with somebody. And you don't necessarily have to have like a lawyer that's $250 an hour to go through with you. I sit down with people all the time, and I know people that like senior advocates that will sit with families. You guys know a list of people that will sit with you for free, you know, just to give that non-biased advice from personal experience and from professional experience. But I definitely think that, and one of the things that Dr. Cornfield, thank you, brought up is that doctors are equally as uncomfortable talking about it sometimes as the families, because they are do no harm. They have that ingrained to fix, to prescribe, to help, to survive. But but on the flip side, I have a family that I'm dealing with right now. They know what's best for mom, but they need the doctor to tell them the recommendation for them to feel emotionally okay with it. So to be able to have the tools to talk to the doctor, so the doctor feels okay with talking about it, I think is also important. So my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's great.
So I thank you for bringing those two things up and for being sympathetic to our side of the difficulty with this also. 1000% agree as to the financial power of attorney aspect to it. I can't speak to that. So thank you for that. And, you know, something that we have witnessed, a colleague of ours lost her husband through COVID. And as hard as that is, as unimaginably hard as that is, it's made even harder by the fact that she's not sure how to change the oil in the lawnmower or whatever other little logistical things around the house there are in addition. So, you know, honestly, I joke with my husband, I'm like, I need you to write down the instructions on how to use the remote controls on the TV, because you have made such a complex man cave that I don't know how to work my own house at this point. And things like that can really be very reassuring also. I know where the passwords are to Facebook and Netflix, and I know which bills are on auto pay for you and things like that. So yeah, very much. The other aspect, and this is a little bit of a shameless plug, of things like those conversations with family members is what we do at the Elliot Center for Palliative Care. And talking through people as to what your options are, what the pros and cons, trying to bring families together, give them a chance to sort of put on the table their worries, their thoughts, their input, and have someone with a medical background kind of work through it with them. So it's very common that people are a bit overwhelmed by the medical field, that things kind of snowball and just happen, and suddenly you're in this situation and contemplating things that are very difficult, and that it can be a difficult thing to have with a provider to put into place for those conversations. So that is certainly a common scenario that we see.
Yeah, absolutely. So if any of you are interested in getting this information, what I will do is you can just put your email address here, and I will follow up and send that along. And, you know, again, oh, thank you. Business cards are great. So I'll take those as well. But again, you know, I think, you know, we entitled this session, you know, the difficult conversations that you need to have, but you really don't want to. I think there is an important level of peace of mind that your wishes are going to be honored, that should something happen to you, that your family or your loved one who's in that role of taking care of your finances. And even if it's not that it's an end of life situation, but if you are, you know, in a long-term care facility on rehab for an X number of months, or you're incapacitated for X number of months, that people do. They know how your bill pays are set up. And, you know, so those financial conversations, it doesn't have to always be around end of life, but how do you keep your household going if physically you're incapacitated? I know the story of a patient of ours at the Elliot who, you know, they're dealing with some long-term, you know, rehab that's going to take them a really long time. And the wife happened to say to me, you know, I didn't know, you know, what bills were on auto pay and what ones weren't, because, you know, my husband handled the finances and I handled, you know, things with the kids differently. And, you know, to have that conversation, to know where those things are, that's what's really important. So we will follow up with everyone on information that might be helpful. And again, you know, Dr. Kornfeld, is there any closing remarks that you want to make before we turn it back to Chris?
The thing that I would most encourage people is that although these conversations feel daunting, once you kind of open that door, it can actually be really rewarding and bring closeness in between family members and friends, and just feel good afterwards. It's really not that hard. The forms are not that complicated, at least the medical ones, to fill out. And I strongly encourage everyone to just take that time and do that and put that in place and let people know about it. And we're here to help you if you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I will say, you know, while I had to face this at the end of life, and as terrible and awful as it was, you know, to lose her and go through that process, there is great honor in helping someone close out their life here. I really saw that as, you know, in a lot of ways, a final gift to her, that she knew exactly where her 3 dogs were going to be going, and, you know, that her wishes were honored. And, you know, we didn't overdo it with a massive memorial service because that wasn't her style. And we did it, you know, in her way. But there is a great deal of honor in supporting people who are facing a catastrophic illness, long-term rehab, or end of life. But Dr. Kornfeld, thank you for the time, and thank you for what you do for our community. Your role at the hospital, you know, our colleagues at the Elliot are truly amazing, but the role you play in particular meets people in a really different way. So thank you for what you do, and I appreciate the time.
Likewise, thank you for inviting me. And so Kelly will happily connect any questions. If you have any of them, just send them towards me, okay?
Yep, will do. Thank you. And Chris.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
I just want to.
I'm going to go get some popcorn now. You put it in my mind.
Exactly. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you guys both very much. We really appreciate you, you know, taking the time to talk with all of our guests online and in person. And we're going to be sure to link everything in the post that we put up there online, and with email addresses and things like that, so they can contact both of you. But we appreciate you bringing some of these subjects to light, and it's definitely things that we should be talking about. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.